Pinky and the Brain, Issue 20. It starts out with the narration revealing that Brain's been looking for aliens with radar with the hopes that they'd help him take over the world. Because he's that desperate, when it's obvious that they'd be more likely to take it over for themselves because they'd have no reason to help him. If they're more advanced than Earthlings, what could he offer them that they couldn't just take or make? Realistically, Brain's tired and bored, and him and Pinky fall asleep. But then they freak out at getting a signal. Brain reminds Pinky of something they both know for no reason, and naturally Pinky's scared at first. It's creative that the alien has a disco ball hanging off his head. He's the leader of an alien horde that wants a party. He says he'll share his gems and golds with them if he shows them a good time, because he knows they're valuable in most places, but they're commonplace where he lives. Brain got very lucky. Brain assumes that the aliens are imitating 70s Earth culture instead of liking disco themselves by coincidence, which is more likely. And Pinky says the plan won't work, even though he says it's brilliant because disco is dead. Never mind the fact that Brain is a time machine, clearly, and could just play some disco records he bought. Instead of considering that, for some reason he decides to take the aliens to Las Vegas and assumes they'll never know the difference. Why did he waste time lying to the aliens about his name and getting him and Pinky dressed up? The alien wants to immediately get to partying, and it cuts to Brain and Pinky being buried in gold up to the neck, but Pinky expects me to believe the jewelry is fake, even though gold is commonplace on the other planet. So they wouldn't need to have fake jewelry. I guess the alien lied. Brain says these aliens are trashing the entire planet. How? There's only a few of them. Brain only knows how the small area around him is doing, and they'd have nothing to gain from trashing it. Brain decides to form an alien fighting team called the Mice in Pink. He explains that the reason they're in pink is that no one could ever forget them, but wouldn't you know that nobody would forget them anyways because they're talking mice? And they're holding guns with plugs attached. Brain wants to rid the planet of the aliens, and in a creative twist, he wants to be seen doing it in the desperate hopes he'll get elected to their ruler. Another creative difference is that he'll want to use his version of the neuralizer to make sure nobody forgets what he did to the aliens. Pinky says something for no reason when he already made it obvious what it was for. Brain uses it on Pinky so that he wouldn't forget to use it. This could have prevented him from using coconuts instead of locusts for his curse. He didn't get the idea to make this before because he only made it based on the neuralizer from Men in Black. And he usually assumes his instructions are important enough to Pinky that he'll remember them. And he wouldn't want to waste a second using this on Pinky every time he gives him instructions. Pinky warns Brain that because the humans are so freaked out running from aliens, they might not notice them. Part of why that could be true is that they're so small. So Pinky embarrasses himself rapping. He admits his lyrics stink while he does that, as we see a human carry an alien, and then a whole bunch of aliens end up trapped in a cage on a car. I hate that we weren't shown how they actually took down the aliens at first. Then we see them trap the aliens in bubbles. A director tells Pinky as he's rapping that the video is going over budget and they're out of time. So this was a music video. It's cathartic that Brain tells him to shut up. But it's not better than not having rapping at all, which didn't motivate me to read it. There's only one alien left, and he's the leader and the biggest and strongest. Brain asks him what he thinks he's doing tearing down Earth property. He says he's making himself a nice town. Huh? That doesn't explain it. He knocks him away, and Pinky somehow thinks it's a good idea to make sure nobody forgets that an alien humiliated them. And the old guy wants to tell people about it, so Brain calls him out on it. He goes back to the lab to get on top of a fake big body he controls with levers I can't see. I like the dialogue here. Pinky says, he'll have to clobber us with a bigger board this time. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Pinky. He stops the alien from stealing food and grabs him as the alien has forced stilted dialogue as usual. The alien hits him in the head with a watermelon and runs away, something that wouldn't have happened if Brain simply shot him earlier. He chainsaws his way out of the watermelon. It sure was smart of him to bring that just in case when he didn't think he'd need it. Then Brain thinks to burn a picture of a 70s celebrity to get the alien running at him angrily. But he would have done that anyways. Pinky and Brain throw lasso wires at him to restrain him and force him to watch a private screening of a terrible movie, which Brain arranged with his technology. His technology must be why he has the reaction he does to it, instead of just not liking the movie. After too many panels, the boring alien finally explodes, and members of the media run over to Brain. Pinky warns him that there's something he should see, instead of just instantly telling him what he's seeing. But for no reason, Brain won't let him finish talking. A UFO crashes in just the wrong place for no reason, and Brain gets flung upwards and swung by a swinging merry-go-round, which makes everyone laugh at him. And there's no reason Pinky would make sure everyone would always remember that, because he'd know that was humiliating. At least someone on TV acknowledges that Brain saved the world again, but he saved it from something he caused. Pinky making sure nobody would forget that also made sure that nobody would forget he saved the world. Hopefully. But still, people in the story too busy laughing at him to respect him. The next story starts out in a small town where Pinky and Brain are the class pets, and it doesn't explain how they got to be. Well, they wouldn't get experimented on this way. Brain wouldn't have access to his stockpile of technology and the stuff he'd take advantage of for his plans, like metals, if he didn't live in the lab. So that's why he wouldn't make this a permanent thing. Brain compliments something, and Pinky thinks he's talking about him and thanks him, even though Brain clearly wasn't looking at him. Brain says he was complimenting the storyteller because he had the full attention of the class. Pinky gets tired, and Brain snaps him out of it and gets apologized to. Brain sees a headline that explains that nobody's trying to challenge the sheriff when he's trying to become the leader of the town. Brain decides to imitate that sheriff in a plan to get elected the mayor that's obviously doomed because he isn't a citizen with a birth certificate. So he wouldn't be allowed to run for mayor. People would find that out eventually. I assume that he'll only be able to run for it because someone would bend the rules for him for the sheer novelty value of a talking mouse. He'd want to see how things would go for Brain. You'd think some people would recognize him, but then they'd also know how incompetent he is. So that's why they wouldn't see the harm in humoring him. Brain wants to climb the political ladder. He should know he wouldn't be allowed to be the first lady because he's not a lady and could never get a president to date him. But Pinky acts like he'd have a chance at that anyways. It only makes sense if he assumes he'll use brainwashing for that. At night, Brain uses a pencil to break out of the cage and tells Pinky to get a small engine for him from the high school auto shop next door. And is smart enough to warn him not to waste time body painting himself in motor oil. Brain's dialogue reveals that the mannequin with bandages on its head is there for the sake of first aid education. He says he's going to use a motor to make this thing able to move for him. Why did he trust Pinky to get a motor for him and stay here when he's got nothing else to do? He was better off coming along. The next morning, just before the sheriff is about to be reappointed as the deputy just because there's no one else running against him, Brain shows up using the mannequin as a body without even keeping its head on and says he wants to run for sheriff. You'd think people would question why he looks like this. In Kid vs. Cat, there's an evil hamster that wants to take over the world, just like Snowball, and he's able to pilot what looks like a human body. He doesn't make this mistake of having his head poke out of it. So why can't he do that? I hate that southern accent's being spelled out. It always makes it harder to motivate myself to read his dialogue. Pinky's too literal-minded, not recognizing Brain's idiom, and he reminds Pinky to call him by the right name, because he said the wrong fake name. The natural consequence of using an overly long fake name. Everyone would see Brain talking to Pinky, and it's not like they're whispering to each other, so they'd hear it too. The mayor says he doesn't know what to do because he didn't print up any election ballots, with everyone just being too polite to ask why Brain looks like this for no reason. Someone tells the mayor to hold a contest between him and Bernie, and the winner would take the offices of sheriff and deputy. Pinky says he's never seen a watermelon seed that spits before. He's seen so much unbelievable technology by this point, and he's so young that it makes sense that he'd believe anything's possible. The contest starts with a three-legged race, which happens instead of the mayor simply postponing reappointing the sheriff in favor of printing out ballots and having a proper legal election, which is what would actually happen. Of course, Pinky has a hard time because he's so small and he falls into Brain's mannequin. Brain explains how he knows how to talk like a Texan, and says he's listened to every Jeff Foxworthy routine dozens of times to try to win these people over. He's saying this in front of them, so they'd get mad at him. The next thing the two of them have to do is skip rocks across a lake. He throws the rock too far and says that the enhanced strength of his motorized body worked against him. They'd hear that. Randy and Bernie easily win every other event, which is skipped over in a panel each that only shows them losing, because that's the only interesting part. Pinky choked on a watermelon seed and caught the back of his pants with a fishing rod. Then Brain walks over to the sheriff with a backup plan he was brilliant enough to come up with and lies that he hates to do this before showing off the sheriff's birth certificate, which is probably something Brain faked. It proves he's from somewhere else and he calls him a Yankee as an insult. But what's wrong with that? But it works anyways, getting everyone in the town turned against Randy and his deputy because of a flimsy reason. Brain plays a song sucking up to the place he's in and gets hugged for it. But then the attorney for the old sheriff and deputy instantly walks over to them and uses a ruler to show off that Pinky's well below the country's minimum height requirements for deputies. It makes sense, but how did no one else know that? How did they get that far? They must have been willfully ignoring it before, and him pointing it out makes it matter? This guy feels like a diabolical ex machina, because why would an attorney show up from out of town that fast? What are the chances that their attorney would be in the same little town as them? Pinky admits that Brain faked the birth certificate because he assumes he wouldn't go through with the plan of becoming the mayor if Pinky couldn't get that job, even though he would still tell him to be with him. So that gets someone mad at Brain. So when Brain falls off the mannequin, someone's hat magically jumps for no reason as he says Brain's not even a man, and a rock gets thrown at them. At least Pinky ends up enjoying the flight as it flies through the air. Pinky and the Brain, issue 21. It starts out in 1966 in front of the White House where Brain sets the perfect location for a secret experiment in a mailbox. They go down a ladder into a room underground with computers. Pinky thanks Brain when he insults him, and he's nice enough to not correct him. Pinky says it's amazing how Brain got the equipment here without the post office finding out. And Brain says he used a shrink ray on them and carried them here at night. It's pretty impressive that he made a shrink ray. I think it can only be possible with magic. He did this all to get closer to the president. And he says he could take over the world if he could gain control of him. Pinky says he could literally get in his head by climbing into his ear. And this gives Brain the idea to do that by shrinking himself first and plugging a remote control device into his brainstem. It's not really like Pinky to respond to Brain threatening him and grabbing him by complaining about him stunting his self-expression. Then Brain shows Pinky a submarine that'll take him to the bottom of the brain, and he gets complimented on it. Then there's impossible dialogue where Brain tells him not to mention a similarity to that yellow submarine because lawyers might be listening, even though they wouldn't be. As the submarine gets shrunken, Pinky has some more annoying dialogue out of boredom about stuff that isn't happening in front of him and gets told to stop. And Pinky says Brain was refusing to join in on his fantasies. At least he admitted they were fantasies. A machine brings the sub into a high-powered spraying device and aims it at the president, who's close to a dog. Gee, I wonder if they'll get sent into the dog instead. After they get launched into the eardrum, there's no indication that happened based on their dialogue, or they would have seen it and commented on it. Brain warns Pinky to be quiet in the ear canal, and Pinky doesn't listen. Then it turns out that of course they are in the dog. So how did they not know this? They'd see the submarine going to the dog's ear because they could see where it was heading. And Brain uses the drill machine, and Pinky hopes it's not going to hurt the president. Brain says unconvincingly that they're too small to do any harm. Out of nowhere, it turns out they'll return to their normal size in an hour. This is smart by saving them the trouble of having to get back to the lab and use a growth ray, but it means he has to make sure he gets out of here in time. And with their failure rate, he was better off not risking that and just making a growth ray. Brain plans on escaping through the mouth, and he assumes the immune system will destroy their enlarging sub before any damage could be caused. Why doesn't he just plan on escaping the mouth in the sub? Wouldn't the sub enlarging the mouth just cause the dog to feel it and spit up first? Brain looks at some impossible sights, and eventually Pinky gets thrown to the wall, and Brain says this is the part of the brain where the sense of balance lies. and the sub's pulses threw off that balance. Pinky says he'll get it rebalanced, with no apparent reason for why he thinks he could do that, and he doesn't listen to Brain telling him no. Brain worries that it'll get thrown into oblivion. He grabs a hoop-shaped thing and uses it as a hula hoop, which somehow realigns the gyroscopic elements and fixes the problem. So that was impossible. After that writing mistake, where it at least got to be useful, the device gets fired into the right place. Brain makes sure the remotes are working properly and gets confused at seeing humans on the screen talk to the dog like he's a dog. He has torpedo tubes fire him and Pinky out of the dog's mouth. Brain calls out Pinky on aiming them at the dog instead and hits him. So that was a boring journey. In the next story, Brain walks on a keyboard, Pinky does some dusting and steps on the keyboard to clean the screen, and gets hit with a dustbuster while wearing an apron for no reason. Pinky gets mad at him uncharacteristically, and then he says Brain doesn't appreciate him and it's just as he thought. And Brain feels sorry for him and tells him not to cry. It's interesting that later in the comic it gets harder for him to handle how Brain treats him, because that's realistic. Brain wonders if he'd make him feel better if he tells him his latest plan. He's compiled a database of the high school students who would become the most successful and brilliant minds. And Pinky says something dumb for no reason, and Brain says he's used a fictional student exchange program to have all of them transferred to his own Acme Valley High School. He sure did that easily. It's hard to believe one person could have that happen. He plans on running for president of the school PTA to get control of those students. He might win from the novelty value of being a talking mouse, but it'd make more sense for him to lose because of his personality and the fact that people should recognize him for the trouble he caused. Not to mention the fact that not just anybody could run for president of a group, especially not a non-citizen with no education or experience. Pinky compliments his plan, and then points out the obvious to him that his plan won't work because the president of the PTA is expected to be an upstanding family man, while his home life is weird. Brain agrees that he doesn't come from a nuclear family. Then he gets the idea to call their son Romy home to show everyone what a good father he is. He's probably not going to show what a good father he is because he isn't taking care of his son at all. And you'd think he'd be mad at him for that and not feel like helping him. Pinky wants to show everyone what a great mother he is. But Brain smartly warns him that they could never let anyone know that Romy was cloned from both of their genes because people wouldn't understand. I certainly don't understand how that's possible. I wonder if Pinky's going to tell people the truth and ruin his plan. Again, Pinky gets uncharacteristically mad when Brain says he'll play the part of his dull and stupid uncle. At least he called him kindly. Pinky says it's insulting and that overalls are outdated. Brain says that he'll once again have the chance to woo Billy, just because he could give her the excuse that he needs her for the plan. I guess she hates the kinds of things that he and Pinky go through every night, and that's why she doesn't help them all the time. She'd only help them now because this plan seems safe, instead of full of slapstick. Romy shows up, and I'm annoyed with him immediately because he's written to talk in slang and call Brain fat. It's nice of him to bring him gifts, and Pinky says it's great to have him home. So he's talking up to them because he doesn't want them to abandon him again. He doesn't seem resentful at all that they neglect him. Brain calls his gift thoughtful, and he compliments Pinky in a way he appreciates. He puts his arm around them and asks how they are, and he gets told to call Pinky his uncle. Pinky gives some food, which quickly looks unappetizing, and Brain introduces Billy to his son. But it just has to backfire for him because she immediately is attracted to him even though there's a significant age difference between them, by male standards. And he's attracted to her. That's a shame. Brain remains oblivious to this, and I hope it stays that way. Romy says he's busy studying at ventriloquist school, and he agrees to help Brain because he wants to date Billy. Sure is a shame that Brain never told him about Billy before. He could have easily introduced her as someone he used to date. Brain thanks Billy for joining him, and she agrees to help because she wants to date his son. Won't he be like, not even 1 year old? We see Brain ending his speech at the Meet the Candidates picnic. How did he even get in the running? Just because of the novelty value that he's a talking mouse, someone bent the rules for him. He's asked for his views on the importance of a good home life. What could anyone possibly have to say about that? What does that even have to do with this? He says he'd like to introduce someone important to him who's been very useful for the campaign, and Pinky expects it to be him, even though he's been with them his whole speech, so you'd think he'd have been introduced much earlier. And he was useless the whole campaign. Brain invites Billy up on the podium, who's also useless the whole campaign, and lies about what happened to Romy's mom. He's lucky he was smart enough to not lie that she's Romy's mom, which you'd think he'd do immediately, but he just assumed she wouldn't appreciate that. If you made a new talking mouse out of the ovum of a regular mouse, he wouldn't be as genetically enhanced as him. Brain introduces his son to the crowd, and Pinky looks sad when someone asks who that goofy-looking person is with them. How did Brain not introduce them right away? Brain says it's always been his policy to hire the sensibility impaired. Why would he say that when it makes him look like he's bad at hiring because he hires incompetent people? He just keeps piling on reasons for Pinky to want to get back at him. Normally he'd have no chance of this backfiring, so he has an excuse to think he could get away with it. But he's been uncharacteristically irritable with him this story, which I kinda like because he feels like a real person this way. But at the same time, it's sort of for the best that he isn't like that normally, because how would he not end up hating him if he's too sensitive to handle him? The audience cheers for Brain and he wins by a landslide. Brain asks where everyone important is, and Romy shows up and apologizes for being late and says they've got important news. Brain tells him not now because the ceremony is about to start. He tells Pinky to stay here because he thinks his career would be ruined if that crowd found out that Romy has 2 dads. Brain naturally wouldn't want people to know because they'd assume he's in love with Pinky for that. Still, why can't Pinky come with them anyways? He already said he's gonna call him Romy's uncle. The only reason he'd think that him being with them would risk people finding out is if he didn't trust them not to tell people the truth. Brain thanks someone who says, "Let's hear for their new president." Then Brain makes a mistake he could have easily not made and proposes to Billy in front of everyone. Statistics actually say that a public proposal is more likely to be turned down, which makes it doubly stupid of him. She showed no romantic interest in him, so why would he think she'd agreed to this? Romy tells Brain in front of everyone for some reason that he's gonna get married to her in Las Vegas. With what money? The crowd's shocked at this. Why did Romy have to tell him this now? It's so obvious this will embarrass him and he won't approve. Then Pinky shows up pretending to be a woman and claims to be Romy's mother. And he calls Brain ungrateful and says she'll stand by Romy's side even if Brain left him behind. This is the first time it's been outright canon that Pinky ruined his plan on purpose. So according to this writer, it is in character for him. It's justified, of course. Brain treated him horribly, and it was obvious from a mile away from all this foreshadowing. But Brain always treats him badly. Someone says Brain's a monster just for wanting to date someone else. When everyone has the right to get tired of someone and want to change partners, no one's obligated to stay with someone if they don't like them, if they don't even have kids with them. Why do these people sympathize more with Pinky, who just showed up, than Brain, who is getting them to like him for a whole campaign? Brain takes off Pinky's wig and tells people the truth, and Pinky says Romy's his son too. Someone gets mad about the truth after someone says, he lives with a guy who likes to dress in women's clothing and that both claim to be that kid's father. It'd still be a little controversial today, but not nearly as much as it is here. What's with these people stating the obvious all the time when reacting to this? It's so stilted. Romy explains the truth, so people get mad at them for no good reason, and it cuts ahead to Romy leaving in a plane, and Pinky and Brain were tarred and feathered. Romy and Billy are pretty stupid if they think Brain and Pinky would be able to hear them from behind a plane's window. Romy apologizes to Brain for the tar and feathers, and just as I was in shock at the idea that the writer would end a story with a change to the status quo, Romy looks scared at Billy talking about their future, and we see him leaving the plane in a parachute in the shadows. There was no foreshadowing that he wouldn't want any of what she did, because he said he wanted to marry her in the first place. So this just comes off like an asshole to get him to not marry her, when it'd barely change the status quo anyways, because we'll never see them again. It's realistic that he wouldn't want kids, it just wasn't foreshadowed. And I wish it was, because that'd reassure me that it's not gonna last right away considering how obvious the foreshadowing is with this series. It sure is forgiving of Brain to put his hand on Pinky's shoulder and smile without any hint of being mad at him, even though he did something that he should have known was guaranteed to ruin his plan, because he insulted Brain in front of the audience. And this time it was obvious that he did out of spite. The first story by Jesse McCann is about Brain and Pinky getting contacted by the leader of a group of aliens by sheer luck, and then when they start trashing the places they're at for no reason, they start catching aliens to try to get people to like them. But that whole sequence was ruined by Pinky rapping, and that's basically all that happens until they have to deal with the big alien a few times, who explodes for no reason but humiliates Brain. The second story by Michael Uri is about Brain using a motorized mannequin to try to become the new sheriff of a town despite how he looks somehow, by competing with him in various games, which are all skipped past really quickly because of course he had no chance with his partner being so small. How did no one ask how he looks like that? It sure is convenient that nobody here admitted that they recognized Brain from his plans, because they just think he's so interesting to watch. Eventually, Brain used a fake birth certificate showing the wrong location to get the people turned against his competition, so that was smart of him to have prepared just in case. But it doesn't matter because the deputy and sheriff go back there with an attorney way faster than would be realistic, to remind them that Pinky's too short to be a deputy. They would have known that. I wish he only showed up after a time skip, because then he'd be believable. And Pinky says Brain faked the birth certificate for nothing, when obviously him not being the deputy anymore didn't prevent Brain from remaining the new sheriff. So he didn't fake it for nothing, until he said that for no reason and got the crowd turned on them. The first story by Jesse McCann is about Brain using a shrunken submarine to try to get to the brainstem of the president and place a remote-controlled device in there. It's just a ripoff of Fantastic Voyage. It's so predictable that they end up in a dog instead. How did they not immediately know that? They'd see who the sub was aiming for, so they would have tried to leave immediately. Nothing interesting happened. The sub just went ahead the whole time. At one point, Pinky did something competent that made no sense, and then he attached the device effortlessly. All the sites they went by made no sense. It was so easy for them that it makes me wonder why he doesn't try the plan again right away. Then he'd win. If that's all he had to deal with as problems, that was his best plan yet. All he'd have to do is make sure he gets in the president's head at that time, and get him to say he's making Brain the president and resigning. Even then, he's overlooking the fact that not just anybody could be made president. The second story by Jesse is about Brain trying to become the president of a high school PTA to get authority over a bunch of smart students. And he thinks he could get people on his side by getting the help of a son of his. And he quickly gets annoying because he sees nothing wrong with wanting to date someone his dad wants to marry, even if he doesn't know he wants that. And what's really confusing is that she's into him immediately. And eventually Pinky gets so fed up with Brain constantly mistreating him that he ruins his plan. But this time, it's clear that even the writer wants you to believe it's on purpose, because he calls Brain ungrateful. When he reveals the truth, when he'd know that would only backfire, they get tarred and feathered. I'd like to say the story had an unrealistically angry reaction from a bunch of Americans because they'd still remember how Brain was endearing himself to them for the entire campaign. So they'd still think he was a good person, and that's all that should matter to them. But they still got told Brain was lying to them the whole time. They'd see him as less trustworthy. And Billy and Romy wouldn't be endearing themselves to them at all with their May December romance that could have easily not been written. But that's clearly not Brain's fault. But I do find it fascinating that Pinky was uncharacteristically irritable and sensitive with Brain.